You've poured dozens, maybe hundreds of hours into it. You've shaped every coastline, raised every mountain, drawn every river. Your fantasy map is a masterpiece. It's detailed, it's gorgeous, it's huge, and it's a little dead. It's a pretty picture, it's a beautiful backdrop, but it doesn't actually do anything. You've made a museum piece, an artwork, but what you really wanted was a playground. And you know the feeling, right? You make the map, you unroll it in front of your players, or maybe you just stare at it for inspiration. You're hoping for this boulder of world building, something that rolls down the hill as easily as you like, and it gathers momentum and power and mass. And as it continues to expand, pulls more and more world building into it. And instead of that spark of life that you were hoping for, you just get beautiful silence. Is that a feeling that you've known in your own world building? How can we create a world that's deeper than just a shallow but beautiful puzzle? How can we make a world that feels as vibrant and rich? Because each session for you, the DM, starts with sitting down and writing out the plot points that you've got to explore. What if there was a better way? What if there was a way that you could create a world in which the answer to the question, what's beyond the next hill, always has an answer? Something that you can create and refer to later on. Something that's adaptable to the circumstances in the world. Something that's living and breathing and transient and changeable, that makes the world alive as you designed it to be. More than just an artwork on a paper. Something that you can come back and refer to later on, instead of making the world up one session at a time. I call them adventure primers, a technique to turn any landmark, from the tiniest village to the most imposing fortress, into an immediate, actionable quest. And by the end of this, you'll know exactly how to use them to transform your static atlas into a living, breathing world that's begging to be explored. And let's really dig into this for a second, because you can't fix a problem until you really understand it. The core issue is that the map is just geographic data. It's an arrangement of symbols and lines. It's not a story. We, as the creators, fall into this trap of believing that if we just make the map detailed enough, the stories will magically pop out. And we think that if we name every river and every forest, the adventures will just write themselves, but they don't. What happens instead is often this sort of creative paralysis. You look at the Duchy of Veerhurst and you think, okay, what happens here? You see the city of Shallowport, you know it's a port on the coast that's fairly shallow. But what's the story? There's the corrupt harbour master skimming money off every ship. There's a sea monster attacking the fishing fleet. There's a smugglers guild using ancient sea caves under the cliffs. And the map doesn't tell you. So you have to invent it all from scratch every single time. And this is exactly why so many campaigns and stories start in a tavern. A tavern is a safe, enclosed space where the DM or the writer can control everything and just hand over a quest hook. It's a retreat from the overwhelming emptiness of a world map. Players get funneled from one plot point to the next. The world starts to feel less like an open sandbox and more like a series of disconnected rooms. And the journey between those points becomes dead air because nothing is happening in between. And this can create a subtle but really damaging disconnect. Players look at the map and they see a dozen cool-sounding places. The Sunder King's Barrow, the ruin of Tol Fallant, the Wither Watch. But they have no reason to go to any of them. There's no hook. Their experience of the world becomes passive. They just wait to be told where the next quest hub is. They stop seeing the map as a field of opportunity and start seeing it as a loading screen more than anything else. And for you, the creator, this can be pretty exhausting. It becomes this sort of treadmill of content creation. Every session you have to make the next session. You have to prop up the weight of the campaign constantly. There's no time to breathe or stop or enjoy yourself a little bit more. You have to keep creating, and that can be tiring. But this is where the Adventure Primer comes in. This is where I am suggesting we create something new, a method of creating world building and quest hooks in a way that don't require you to introduce them immediately. A way of very simply, very quickly dotting the map with lore, creating an actual sandbox that is waiting to be explored. So, what is an adventure primer? Okay, simply put, it is a short, concise, super structured block of info that you tie directly into a specific spot on your map. You can think of it like a micro adventure module or a one-page dungeon in prose form. It isn't a one-shot adventure book. Its goal isn't to write out the entire quest, but to give you the key ingredients, the seeds of an adventure that you can grow out in the moment. Because the magic of the primer is brevity. It's not about writing a novel for every dot on the map. It's the opposite. You want to boil down a location's potential for conflict into a format that you can read and absorb in under a minute. It's the cure for creative paralysis because it lowers the bar for what a finished idea really looks like. You're not building a whole house. You're just making one really good brick. And once you have a good pile of bricks, building the house gets a whole lot easier. And you can keep these in your atlas. Maybe that's a physical binder with your printed map, or even better, a digital tool like a personal wiki or a world-building app like World Anvil or Legend Keeper. And there you can link your primers directly into pins on an interactive map. And imagine clicking on a mountain range and getting a little pop-up with a perfectly encapsulated adventure seed ready to go. That is the power that we are aiming for. And this system will completely change your relationship with your world. Your atlas goes from being a static collection of images to a database of adventure. Your player points to some ruins on the edge of a swamp, you click the pin and you're ready. They decide to take a random detour through a forest you haven't thought about in months, you find the primer for it, and suddenly that forest is buzzing with danger and opportunity. It helps you to improvise. It slashes your prep time. It allows you to think outside the box. It creates this sandbox world that nonetheless can still have an interconnected or overarching plot. Because if you're creating dozens of these primers at the same time, which you can do in an afternoon if you really think your way through it, then you can create 5 or 10 that are part of the same overarching theme. Maybe a shadowy force is manipulating the politics of the kingdom from behind the scenes. And then 5 or 10 more are also being manipulated from behind the scenes. Maybe one event leads into another, which leads into another, which leads into another. And then if your players find only a few of them, then the others can all not only resolve themselves, but have an outcome that changes the world as they're moving through it. It makes it more alive, more tangible, more real, and gives them an outcome that for things that they would never have thought of beforehand. It gives them a consequence for not doing things. And that's a fantastic way to have a world be alive. Before we get into the nitty-gritty of how to write one of the primers, I want to talk about what we need to keep in mind before we do so. Because there are 3 fundamental things that we need to remember in making them. And the first thing is that it needs to have brevity over bloat. We're not writing an adventure module here. That would take far too much time. What we're doing instead is we are allowing ourselves to create the seeds for inspiration later on, something that is adaptable to given social situations. Rather than laying out the precise course of events that needs to happen, we want to instead talk about what people want, what they intend to do, what they desire at the end, rather than the methods they're going to choose to get there. Rather than leveling out in painstaking detail everything they could possibly encounter along the way, we want to give ourselves and the players an understanding of what the essence of it is. Remember, stay brief. Don't overcomplicate it, because that's only going to exhaust you as well. And we're trying to avoid that. Because the second thing to remember about creating these primers is we want inspiration, not prescription. We don't want to tell us in the future, or even the players themselves, precisely what is going to happen along every step of the journey, because that means that it's only going to be useful for a short amount of time within the plot of the world. If you design a primer that uses a certain character, and then that character dies before they can, activate the primer, then it's going to be useless for you later on. Instead, you want to give yourself inspiration. You want to have the ingredients, but don't necessarily tell yourself what is going to happen. Just put this situation together as much as is possible for you to do so. If one character is irreplaceable, then your primer might fall apart. Think about how a situation itself can come about through a variety of different means. Like how a war doesn't necessarily start with the assassination of a single person. It is all about the vast forces moving behind the scenes, waiting for a single spark to start it. So how we do that is, for instance, instead of writing the players must go and retrieve a magical object or an amulet, let's say, from a small goblin camp. You can instead say, the local goblin chieftain has a stolen amulet. He wants to use it to increase his tribe's power by breeding new warriors. A local shaman thinks that it is the cure to a growing plague, whereas the original owner of the amulet is willing to pay a great deal of money to retrieve it. You see the difference? The first one is a prescriptive quest. The second one is a situation that allows for your players to make decisions about it without prescribing too much about what the situation itself actually entails. It gives you this relationship between the three of them, these motivations, without actually putting anything down in certainty. And that's what we want to do. Because the last one that we think about, the last of the three major principles we think about when we're creating these adventure primers, is the idea of modularity and connection. So what I mentioned before about how several of them can be connected with this one overarching theme. If they're happening at roughly the same time, how are things being connected? You know, whether they're being influenced by political unrest, by a thieves guild, by a local marauding dragon, or by this sort of rock slide of events where one leads to the other, leads to the other, leads to the other, you can absolutely make that. Instead of sitting down and creating adventure primers for a single location, you can think about creating adventure primers for a single chain of events. One thing leads to another, leads to another. A war, for instance, is a great example of that, between two different countries, perhaps, or between, gods or demons. And that allows you to think about how they can spread these adventures out over a larger area, but still have them being connected by the same motivations, by the same characters, by the same initial inciting events. If your players are around to witness something that they can't stop, that is more of a cutscene than anything else, then that cutscene can trigger the opening crawl, if you will, for a variety of different primers anywhere in the kingdom. And you can write down in your primer what will happen if the players don't intervene by a certain point. And that's your opportunity to make your world even more alive. All right, let's get practical. We've covered the why, so let's get to the what. A solid adventure primer has a few specific high-impact parts, and I've boiled it down to a simple 7-part template, which gives you everything you need and hopefully nothing that you don't. So when you write the primer for a location, this is what you'll fill out. First of all, use your title and your location. This one's easy. Give your spot a name, note where it is on your map, maybe by region or grid coordinates. For example, the Sunder King's Barrow in Veerhurst Forest, some 12 miles northeast of Shallowport. And the next is the hook. This is probably the most important part. The hook is the one compelling sentence that grabs attention and lays out the core problem. It's the headline for your adventure. It's not a call to action yet. It's just the raw situation. So think of it like a news flash from that location. For instance, a prophet in Clifton is gathering a following claiming that the old gods are returning, and a time of blood and iron is nigh. Or the mines near Picton went silent as rumours abound of an ogre bellowing in the night. Or a ghostly tollkeeper has appeared on the old King's Bridge near Fort Fenlock, and it demands a memory as payment to cross. And the sentence that you're creating for the hook should immediately make you ask questions and sense conflict. So who's the tollkeeper? Where's the ogre's lair? Is this prophet for real? Next is significant NPCs. List 2 or 3 key people involved in the mess. You don't want to write a biography, just give them their name and a single line which describes their role and what they want. So for instance, Sir Callan is a disgraced knight of the Escallion Order, longing for the chance to prove himself after he fled from a rampaging dragon. Or Elara is a desperate mother whose child was taken by an ogre. She'll offer her life savings to get him back. Or even old Griselda the Hag, a swamp witch who knows the crypt's secrets but demands a grim price for them. These NPCs provide the role-playing moments and the quest hooks, and their conflicting goals are the engine for the adventure. Next is the enemies, the threats, the list the main bad guys, the dangers of the place. Again, be brief. Focus on what makes them interesting. So the Rock of the Wither is a gargantuan ferocious eagle, long thought to be merely myth and the symbol of the old gods. The Flint Gullet Moor is Sulk, the cunning and ravenous ogre that has made his home in the Flint Gullet near Picker. Or Lord Rinvald Grim is a lord of old Tabannig, risen from the dead due to the throne of Clifton sitting empty. Next is the encounter guide or the scaling tips, and this is a huge help for TTRPG game masters. It's a quick note on how to tweak the difficulty. It keeps the primer useful when your party is level 1 or level 10. So think about it in terms of low level or high level or for writers. So for low level, for instance, you can say only a few ghouls and the white is damaged and slow. At high levels, you say the ghouls are led by a clever ghast, the white is at full power, and the mist does psychic damage. And then under writers, you can talk about how the environment is dangerous. You can use this section for plot complications. For example, a rival group of tomb robbers shows up at the same time, or the ritual to calm the spirits has to be done before the next full moon. Something to give them a ticking time bomb or add in a little bit of zest to your fruit salad of an adventure. Next one is the rewards. What do the characters get for winning? And don't just list goals. Make the rewards interesting, able to generate new stories. If you think of it as every adventure is guaranteed to give them gold, what else do they get? Do they get the love of the townsfolk? Do they get an ally in the form of a wandering bard? Do they get a magical item? Think about it, how it can lead on to the next bit. So in terms of specifics, it could be the Warden's Aegis, a shield which can deflect one magical curse per day. It could be a quest hook, like a map to a hidden library, which reveals the location of another adventure site. Or it could even be the Hag's Favor. So Griselda the Hag now owes the party one big magical favor. And that's great for an adventure later on. And last of all, the lore tie-in. This is the last, this most crucial piece that links this little adventure to your bigger world. It's a single sentence that hits the larger story. It can also reference what happens if the players don't take up this adventure in time, if you've got a series of events that are connected. So the shield has the crest of the lost Tarbanic dynasty, an artifact nobody in the kingdom has seen for 500 years, implies about the politics, can give you some ideas for quest hooks later on. You could say the ghouls were made by a necromantic ritual from the grimoire of Aksagul, a book that's supposed to be locked up in the capital. Again, another quest hook. Or the rescued child now mutters fragments of a terrifying prophecy about a god sleeping under the mountains. Gives you two different directions to go. You can investigate the prophecy, you can investigate the mountains. And that's it. 7 specific focused parts. And when you put them together, you get everything you really need to create a quest off of that is adaptable to whatever level, whatever your characters are doing, whatever else is happening in the world. And you can think about how you can color coordinate them so that they are specific to different quest arcs. Or think about how you can, pull in NPCs from nearby close adventure primers so that they can share them. Although don't do that too often in case they die off. Be prepared to use them as briefly as possible to make whole adventure very, very easily for yourself later on. Okay, so let's do a very, very quick practical guide. This is one that I'm actually going to create for my own atlas, and we're going to break it down and we're going to talk about how to make it. So the first thing I'm going to start with is the title, the Stoopbridge Quest. So it's going to be on the Stoopbridge Cliffs. It's going to be the Harpy's Nest there. So I'm going to write the Harpy's Nest at Stoopbridge. Then we're going to brainstorm a hook. What is the problem here? The name gives us a hint. It's going to be harpies, but there are just harpies here. Isn't really a hook. We need a situation. So I'm going to write, the harpies of Stoopbridge have started singing a new magical alluring song that wrecks ships, but they always ignore ships flying the flag of the reclusive Duke of Veerhurst. A good tip that I have for creating a hook is have but somewhere in there, because it will give you two varying situations. It gives you something to work with, right? Then we move on. We define the NPCs. We need a few different characters with different things at stake. So we're going to come up with Captain Anya, a pragmatic merchant captain who lost a ship and a crew to the song. She's offering a simple reward to end the threat. She's the sort of the heroic business angle. She allows your players to think about, a reward for their actions. Because the second one is Silas, the lighthouse keeper. He's an old man who's lived near the cliffs for decades. He can give you more information. He said the harpies were peaceful until a beautiful dark-haired sorceress visited Lord Veerhurst last month, and he's the source for information for local rumors. Then we get to one of the next ones, which is the matriarch Screechwing, who's the harpy leader. She's not actually evil. She's been magically enthralled by a cursed flute given to her by Lord Veerhurst's new advisor, right? So she could be this sort of tragic figure, not just a monster to kill. The more detail you give, the more you can flesh that out later on. You don't want to be forgetting about that. If you write this early on, then come back to it 6 months later, you want the details that you think are important to remember. Because then you're going to detail the threats. The harpies are the main threat, but let's add some flavor. The siren's song isn't just a normal harpy attack. It requires a tough save to resist a magical force. You have cliffside nests, which is a very dangerous terrain for the players. It's a major hazard which requires skilled climbing. And you could have the patrols for the Duke of Veerhurst, small, fast ships which are loyal to him. They sail the waters, and they will they'll warn away anyone getting a little bit too close to the Harpy's nest. Ostensibly on the surface to protect people for their own safety, but underneath they've got a more suspicious motive. The next is add the scaling tips. How do we make this work for different power levels? So let's say at low levels, the song is the main danger, but the Harpies themselves are standard enemies. Lord Veerhurst patrols are small and can be avoided or scared off. At higher levels, the matriarch is a powerful spellcaster herself. You can give her the mage stat block in addition to the abilities of a Harpy, and the song can charm multiple people at once. Plot complications could be, that a rival party shows up at the same time. They want to salvage the goods from the shipwrecks while the Harpies are distracted by the party. So you could have a three-way battle going on there at the same time. And last of all, if you really want to make this sort of climactic, for a final, end scale quest, you could have it that Lord Veerhurst's new advisor is actually a demon in disguise who has been orchestrating this in exchange for something from Lord Veerhurst. Again, you don't have to say what, but you could just put in exchange for something valuable to her. Then you can figure that out later on. So then we determine the rewards. Let's offer a mix of some loot and some story fuel. Again, we're going to assume that they're going to get some gold at the end. So we want things that aren't necessarily gold. So the cursed flute, once you break the curse, it becomes a powerful magical instrument that can charm beasts. You could gain, depending on how you handle it, Lord Veerhurst's gratitude or his wrath. So depending on whether or not you kill the advisor, whether he's been under a spell, whether you, kill the Harpies or leave them alone, it's entirely up to you, but you can have a powerful ally on your side or a powerful enemy working against you. And, last of all, you can find something a little bit more mundane, like the map of the sunken treasure that you can find in a Harpy nest, which is taken from a shipwreck, which leads to another adventure. And then, last of all, you can create the tie-in that brings it into the larger world. And we already have that implied by saying that, the Duke of Veerhurst's new advisor is a demon. But you could also say that, the magical artifact that's used to create the curse, this flute, is marked with symbols that are associated with the demonic dragon Axegul, whose cult is beginning to stir in the capital. But more than that, the flute itself is recorded as being in the treasury of the palace in the capital. And there you have it. And in just a few moments, we have turned what is essentially an empty point on the map into a very dense, very rich area that has a lot of lore and backstory and world building, and the opportunity for them to wander on through and still find something that's really fleshed out in a way that means that you don't have to improvise that in the moment. So if improvisation is not your strong suit, I would recommend creating these adventure primers. I think that they will be very, very handy for someone who's creating their own atlas. I'm going to be creating several for my own. You can find what I've created in the Legend Keeper and in the Patreon printed version of the atlas that you can find in the link in the description below. And I got to say, the adventure primer isn't a magic wand. It's a tool that you can use to greater or lesser effect, and you've got to really think about how you can bring it into your world and use it most effectively. It's not going to magically fix all your issues overnight, but it does give you the opportunity to think about world building in a way that you might not have approached it before. So let me know how you would create your own adventure primers. Give me an example of one in the descriptions. I would love to hear your takes on it, whether or not you want to change things up for your own world, whether you have a kind of campaign that requires some sort of different description or details than the ones that I've added into my version of the adventure primer here. Let me know what you think. And as always, I want to thank my Patreon and YouTube subscribers. I could not do this without you. I'm so grateful for your support. And we've just passed 10K subscribers on YouTube, which is an absolutely fantastic achievement. I'm so pleased about that. What's more, as a thank you to everyone, in addition to this Atlas update and of course maps, traps and mishaps, which is the previous video in this series, I am now coming out with 2 videos per week. I've used some of the adventures that I've discussed in this episode so that I can create not only adventure primers for them, but full maps that I will be talking about how I created adventure encounters that use abilities, environments, and hazards in a way that complements stat blocks. So if you want to be watching that, I'm going to be coming out with a really quick map series later this week. Keep your eyes open for it. Hit that notification bell, subscribe to the channel, and I will see you next week for the continuation of this series, or in a few days for the first of those maps, the Red Fang Warrens. I'll see you then.